Hi, my name is Maura, and last year, at my brother's birthday, he slapped my daughter. She made him a gift with her own hands. He called it cheap trash and threw it in her face. My parents, they laughed. They said, "Kids these days always so spoiled." That was the moment I knew I wasn't part of a family. I was part of a system that punished love and rewarded silence. So I made one phone call. Just one. By sunset, they lost everything. But the real question isn't how I broke free. It's why it took me so long to leave in the first place. Tell me, what would you do if the people who raised you became the ones who destroyed your child? Let me know where you're listening from. And stay with me. Because this story, it only sounds like a family drama, but it's really about survival. The air was thick with humidity as I turned off the main road and into my brother's neighborhood in suburban Houston. Late spring always carried that heavy warmth, like the kind that sticks to your skin and makes everything feel a little too close. Asha, my 10-year-old daughter, sat in the passenger seat with both hands cradling the small wooden box she'd spent 2 weeks carving. Her initials and Israel's were etched into the lid, a heart-shaped swirl linking them. "I hope he likes it," she whispered. "He will," I lied softly, though even as I said it, my stomach turned. Pulling into Israel's driveway, I could already hear the bass-heavy music bleeding from the backyard. Laughter drifted over the wooden fence like cigarette smoke, forced, just a little too loud. I parked, reached for the paper bag holding our gift, and stepped out into a world I never truly belonged to. The backyard was set up like every other family event. Plastic tables, red Solo cups, aluminum trays of food sweating in the heat. Israel held court near the grill, surrounded by friends who talked too loud and laughed too fast. My mother, Darlie, waved at someone behind me and brushed right past without acknowledging us. Classic. I held Asha's hand as we made our way to the patio. The moment she spotted her grandmother, her face lit up. "Grandma!" Darlie gave her a brief side hug, more of a pat, before turning to refill someone's drink. Asha's smile faltered. We found a spot near the back corner, beneath a tree that offered just enough shade to breathe. I handed Asha the gift again, and she clutched it like it held her entire heart. I watched the scene play out, my brother flipping burgers like he was hosting a cooking show, our father standing nearby with a beer belly and a bigger opinion. When he spotted me, he raised his cup. "Well, look who finally showed up. Real men still paying your bills, huh?" I smiled, tight-lipped. "Nice to see you too, Dad." They never changed. For years, I'd been the silent bank behind the scenes, covering hospital bills, making sure their electricity didn't get cut, bailing Israel out of yet another financial mess. I never asked for thanks. But today, even basic decency felt like too much to hope for. Asha tugged my sleeve. "Can I give it to him now?" I nodded, and she approached Israel with the cautious hope of a child who believed kindness would always be met with kindness. "Happy birthday, Uncle Izzy," she said, holding out the box. He took it, glanced at it, and burst out laughing. "You made this? What am I, 5?" The laughter around him stopped, like a needle scratch on vinyl. Asha stood frozen, her smile breaking at the edges. She tried to explain, "I carved it all by—" He cut her off, tapped her forehead with the back of his hand. Not hard, but enough to make her stumble. "Don't be so sensitive," he muttered, tossing the box onto the table. "Jesus, kids these days." My breath caught. It wasn't just the slap, it was the sound of it, the casualness. And then came the laughter, again. This time from my parents. Darlie chuckled, shaking her head. "Oh, don't be dramatic. Kids need tough love." My father added, "Better now than the real world teaching her later." Asha's eyes welled with tears as she looked at me, pleading for me to say something, and I did, just not what anyone expected. I stood, picked up the wooden box from the table, brushed the dirt from it gently, and placed it back in Asha's hands. Then I turned to all of them, my parents, my brother, every so-called adult who thought this was funny. "From now on," I said, my voice low, even, "you're on your own." Nobody moved. Israel snorted. "You serious?" I didn't answer. I just took Asha's hand and walked away, past the table, past the plastic cups and the frozen stares, past the childhood I'd tried so hard to still believe in. We didn't speak in the car. She fell asleep halfway home, her head resting against the window, clutching the box like it was the only thing left holding her together. By the time we pulled into our driveway, the sun had started to dip behind the trees. I carried her inside, tucked her into bed without waking her. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water but didn't drink it. Instead, I opened my laptop, pulled up my banking app, and scrolled through my accounts. Every bill I'd paid for them, every check I'd sent, every favor, every second chance. And then I picked up my phone. One number, one call. I didn't need to say much, just one breath. And then quietly, to no one in particular, I whispered, "By sunset, they'll know what it means to be on their own." The silence after I whispered those words didn't last long. Less than an hour later, as I stood rinsing strawberries in the kitchen, I got the first ping, a message from the security company tied to my parents' property. "Power failure detected at Darley and Howard's residence." 10 minutes after that, another ping. This one from the electric provider. "Service interruption confirmed at Israel's address." I didn't need to see it, but I pictured it anyway. The power company truck rumbling up to the curb. The confused look on Israel's face as the porch light flickered off. The rising panic when he tried the thermostat and realized the air conditioning had gone quiet. Houston's spring heat settling in like an unwanted houseguest. Asha was curled on the couch with a book, her small feet tucked beneath her. "Do we still have to go to Grandma's next weekend?" she asked, not looking up. I hesitated before answering. "No, baby, not anymore." My phone buzzed again. Voicemail from my mother. Then another. Missed call from my father. Text from Israel. "What the hell did you do?" I set the phone down and turned back to the cutting board. It felt almost absurd how normal everything looked in my kitchen. The roast chicken in the oven, the sweet potatoes steaming on the stove. And yet, outside of this space, something irreversible had already begun. I hadn't made the call out of anger, not really. It was something colder, steadier. I was done carrying people who had never once thought to carry me. Years ago, during the recession, my father had asked me to help. "Just a little help, sweetheart," he'd said, hand resting on my shoulder like a weight. "The house note's getting tight, and your brother's business needs a cosigner." And I did it. I signed papers I didn't fully understand, gave access to accounts they should have never had. They promised it was temporary, and I believed them, because that's what daughters do. The call I made earlier wasn't to threaten or warn. It was to my attorney, filing the paperwork to revoke my financial co-signatures, freeze the accounts in my name, and begin proceedings to sever legal ties from the property I technically still owned. I pulled the chicken from the oven just as Asha set the table. She didn't ask more questions, and I didn't offer any answers. Over dinner, I could feel the tremble in my phone across the counter, messages arriving in angry waves. "Are they mad?" Asha asked, poking at her peas. I sipped my water before replying. "Maybe, but sometimes mad people just have to sit in the dark for a while." She giggled, then quickly covered her mouth, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to laugh. I smiled at her and passed the butter. Later that evening, as dusk settled over the windows and the hum of our own power hummed steady and sure, I finally answered one of the calls. Mora, what in God's name is going on? My mother snapped the moment I picked up. Her voice crackled with fury, disbelief, and something more vulnerable she couldn't quite hide. I'm not paying your bills anymore, I said plainly. You're punishing us? For what? That little girl of yours needs thicker skin? She's 10, I cut in, and she made something with love. Israel humiliated her, and you laughed. I've paid for your comfort while you chipped away at mine for years. We're your family, she spat, like it was a fact that excused everything. Exactly, I said, voice even. And family doesn't mean bruises and unpaid debt. She went silent. I waited a beat, then hung up. Not even a minute passed before my father's name flashed across the screen. I didn't want to answer, but something inside me, something old and unfinished, made me press accept. I don't know what poison you've been drinking, he said, skipping past any greeting, but I didn't raise you to be ungrateful. There it was. That word. Ungrateful. The same one he used when I turned down his toast at 15 because he was drunk. When I said I didn't want to drop out of college to help at the store. When I asked, once, if he could say he was proud of me. But this time I didn't flinch. Then maybe you didn't raise me at all, I replied, and ended the call. By the time I walked down the hall, Asha was brushing her teeth. She met my eyes in the mirror. They're not coming over, right? No, I said gently. Not anymore. We tucked into bed a little earlier that night. She reached for the wooden box, now cracked from the fall earlier. One corner had splintered and the stain had rubbed off. Still, she held it close. Can we fix it? She asked. I sat beside her, brushing hair from her cheek. Not everything that breaks needs fixing, I said quietly. Some things just need to stop breaking us. She nodded, not fully understanding, but somehow understanding enough. I turned off the light and sat for a long time in the dark, listening to her breathe. That night, I dreamed of the wooden box, but this time I was the one being thrown away. I woke to a soft knock at the door. For a moment, I stayed still, hoping I'd imagined it. Then it came again. 3 short raps, too familiar in rhythm to be anyone but family. I pulled a sweatshirt over my pajamas and walked barefoot to the door. When I opened it, there she was. My mother stood on the porch, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Her lipstick had faded, and the hard lines around her mouth looked deeper than they did the day before. Her hair was flattened on one side like she hadn't slept, or had tried to and failed. You embarrassed your brother, she said without greeting. Not a hello, not even a pause to ask if Asha had slept okay. I didn't invite her in, not right away. I stepped aside because I was raised to be polite, and she walked past me like she owned the space, like nothing had changed. I kept my arms folded, stayed standing. She sat at the edge of the couch, her purse still hanging from her shoulder. She didn't look around. She didn't ask about Asha. She just stared at the coffee table like it had done something wrong. I thought you'd come to apologize, I said. Her eyes flicked up. For what? Saying your brother needed some tough love? He was just teasing. You know how he is. I did know how he was, and I knew how she was too. I walked to the kitchen and made coffee, half to collect myself and half to remind her she was a guest now, not the woman who used to tell me what brand of paper towels to buy. While it brewed, I leaned against the counter, arms still crossed. You came to my house, I said evenly, after letting your son humiliate your granddaughter, and now you're here to scold me? He's under pressure, Mora, she said, her tone shifting like she was trying on a softer coat. The business, the money issues, it's a lot. You know that. I nearly laughed. Of course I knew. I knew because I was the one who covered those bills. When his credit cards were maxed out, I quietly made payments to keep them from defaulting. When their electricity was overdue, It was my debit card the system kept on file. Growing up, I was the one who handled damage control, calling the mechanic when Dad forgot to pay for Mom's car inspection, slipping a check into the mailbox when Israel racked up speeding tickets and couldn't afford the fine. I planned birthday parties, holiday dinners, sent flowers on behalf of all of us, even when they forgot. "You were always the strong one," she said, like it was a compliment. "No," I said quietly. "I was obedient." She shifted in her seat. I saw it, the flicker of discomfort, of something unraveling. "You raised me to believe strength meant silence," I continued. "That being a good daughter meant cleaning up after the messes of men." "Don't be dramatic," she said, sharper now. "You're twisting things." I stepped closer. "You taught me that love looks like compliance, that speaking up was ungrateful, that questioning your choices meant I didn't care. You raised a peacemaker, not because you valued peace, but because it kept things quiet." Her mouth tightened, but she didn't interrupt. "You want to talk about embarrassment?" I said. "You should be embarrassed, not because of what I did, but because your son slapped a 10-year-old and you laughed." We stared at each other, the space between us heavy, and then she stood. "I guess I made a mistake coming here," she said, collecting her bag like it was some shield. "You've changed." "No," I replied, walking to the door. "I've just stopped pretending." She walked out without another word. I watched her go, closing the door behind her as quietly as I could. The rest of the day passed in fragments, dishes washed without memory, laundry folded while my thoughts drifted to old arguments, long silences. The times I apologized just to keep the air from cracking. That afternoon, as I was sorting through work emails, a new message popped up. From Israel. Subject line, "You sure about this?" I hesitated, then opened it. The message was short. "You think cutting us off makes you strong? Wait until people find out you paid for everything. You'll look pathetic, not powerful, just sad." I read it twice, then again. For years, I'd been terrified of that exact thing. Of people seeing me as weak, desperate, trying to buy love that should have been freely given. But now it just sounded like the tantrum of a man who'd never heard no before. I closed the laptop and stood up. In the hallway, I heard quiet humming. Asha in her room. I peeked in. She sat cross-legged on the floor, a bottle of wood glue beside her, carefully pressing the pieces of the broken box back together. A little lopsided, a little messy, but steady. She looked up when she noticed me, her eyes hopeful. "I think I can fix it," she said. I knelt beside her. "You can try," I said gently. She held the top in place for a few seconds, waiting for it to set. "It might look different," she said. "That's okay," I said. "Different doesn't mean worse." She nodded, focused again. The soft snap of the glue setting echoed in the quiet. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and maybe that was enough. The bank didn't call, they emailed. A short, formal note, just one line that lodged itself in my throat like a stone. "You are listed on an account currently under internal investigation." That was it. No apology, no explanation, just a summons. By the time I parked downtown, the sky was already leaning toward the burnt orange of early evening. The glass doors of the building reflected back a version of me I almost didn't recognize, composed but taut. I adjusted my cardigan, wiped my palms on my jeans, and walked in. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and copier toner. A man with a too-white smile offered me water while escorting me to a small conference room. My lawyer, Danielle, was already there. She didn't smile. "They flagged multiple transfers," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "Funds from the family business, all still linked to your name." I blinked, barely absorbing her words. "But I revoked my access." "You initiated the separation, but your brother used old forms. digital signatures, forged. The banker across from us, a younger guy named Craig with the kind of haircut that screamed Junior VP, nodded solemnly. Legally, you're still listed on several legacy agreements. He's been moving money under your authorization for at least 8 months. My stomach churned. 8 months. That was back when I was still covering their water bills and pretending things were fine over Thanksgiving dinner. Danielle leaned in. They're not charging you, yet, but they'll need statements, full transparency. I nodded slowly. You'll get everything. Back home, I moved like a ghost through the house, Asha upstairs doing homework, while I sat at the dining table surrounded by paper, receipts, emails, copies of contracts I once signed, thinking they were temporary, always temporary, to help the family. One message from Dad stood out, dated 5 years ago. Don't make this a big deal, Maura. Just help. You're the strong one. I read that line over and over. You're the strong one. They always said it like a compliment, but it had become my curse. Strength had turned into silence, and silence had turned into liability. A sharp ping broke my trance. A notification from Facebook. Against my better judgment, I opened it. There it was. A post from Israel. A grainy photo of our parents' house with the caption, "She pulled the plug. Guess family means nothing when money's involved." Beneath it, the comments stacked up like falling bricks. Wow, she must be heartless. Cutting off your own parents? What kind of daughter does that? Isn't she the rich one? Must be nice to play God. I didn't reply. I didn't even scroll. I shut the laptop gently and whispered, "Let them talk." Then I picked up the phone and called Danielle again. "I want everything out," I said. "Every file, every transaction. I want no shadows left for them to hide in." Her silence on the other end wasn't hesitation. It was approval. That night, the house was quiet. Asha had gone to bed after brushing her teeth without being asked, a rare gift in and of itself. I sat at the kitchen table with 2 coffee mugs, one full, one empty. Asha wandered in, rubbing her eyes. "Why 2 cups?" I smiled. "One's for me. And the other? For the part of me I'm finally forgiving." She didn't understand, but she nodded anyway and went back to bed. The spoon clinked softly against the ceramic, over and over, steady and slow, like a drumbeat before something breaks wide open. The calm wasn't peace, it was preparation. By the time the sun rose, the air was already thick with tension. I walked out to the driveway with Asha, her small backpack bouncing against her back, her fingers wrapped tightly around mine. We were barely 2 steps from the porch when I saw it. Long, deliberate scratches carved across the driver's side of my car like jagged signatures. A sharp message was tucked beneath the wiper. "Stay quiet or lose more." I froze. The wind shifted slightly, making the paper flutter like it didn't know the weight of the words it carried. Asha saw it before I could reach it. "Did Uncle Israel do this?" she asked, voice trembling, her eyes wide. I didn't answer, but I didn't have to. She saw the truth on my face, the way I clenched my jaw, the way my hand trembled as I pulled the note free and crumpled it in my palm. My silence told her more than words ever could. I drove her to school with the windows down, the air too thick to breathe otherwise. Neither of us spoke. When I kissed her goodbye at the curb, she held on a little longer than usual. I waited until she disappeared behind the doors before pulling away. Instead of heading to work, I drove straight to the police station. The woman at the front desk asked routine questions in a tired voice, typing as I spoke. She barely looked at me until I said, "I want to file a vandalism report." "Suspect?" I hesitated. My tongue felt heavy, like it knew once the name left my mouth, things would never be the same. "Yes, my brother, Israel Holton." That got her attention. She stopped typing and looked at me for the first time. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." They brought me a clipboard. I filled out the complaint, my signature shaky but not from fear, from the sudden weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time, I was no longer covering for him. I was no longer pretending. By the time I arrived at my office downtown, my phone was already buzzing. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. It was my mother. "You called the police?" Her voice was ice over gasoline. "Yes." "You called the cops on your own blood?" I closed my office door gently. He stopped being my blood the moment he put his hands on my child. There was a beat of silence, then a string of accusations, guilt, shame, the word ungrateful tossed like a weapon, but none of it pierced. I simply ended the call and turned off my phone. I had work to do. But later that afternoon, my assistant slid an envelope across my desk. This came by courier, no return address. Inside was a printout of an online post, Israel again. A photo of our parents' house, now blurry from the poor lighting, captioned, "She's trying to take our family down. First the house, now the name." The comments section was already a war zone. "She's always been jealous." "She's bitter because she's alone." Some people think money gives them the right to destroy people. Old friends unfollowed me. Clients started calling in, "Just checking," with a nervous edge in their voices. My name wasn't just in their mouths, it was being twisted. But instead of breaking, I printed every comment, every post, every screenshot. That evening, I handed the entire stack to Danielle. "They wanted attention," I said. "Let them have the spotlight. Just make sure the whole story gets told." Danielle nodded. "We'll handle it." Back home, the house was quiet again. Asha was on the floor in the living room, hunched over the wooden box, piecing it together with fresh glue and focused hands. The cracks hadn't disappeared. In fact, some were now more visible than ever. But the box stood again, uneven but whole. She looked up at me. "It's not perfect." I knelt beside her, ran my fingers over the rough edges. "Neither are we," I said softly. "But we're not broken anymore." We sat there for a while, the glue drying between us like an invisible thread. Asha leaned against me, and I wrapped my arm around her. No more hiding, no more pretending. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window with a mug of tea, watching the neighborhood lights flicker off one by one. I thought of the years I spent trying to keep everything afloat, trying to be the quiet one, the strong one. But strength wasn't silence, and silence had cost me too much. Now I had something louder, truth. But while I rebuilt, they plotted. And their next move nearly took everything from me again. By the time rain started pattering against the windows that evening, something had shifted. I knew the fight was no longer internal. It began with an ordinary call from my bank, just a low voice on the other end. "Mora, you're listed as guarantor on an account flagged for misuse." Then came the knock at the door. A courier stood on my porch holding a thick beige envelope. Inside, a cease and desist letter filed by my brother, filed in my name. Defamation, emotional distress. I held the envelope for a long moment, listening to the rain, thinking about how quiet things had always been. Until now. In the meeting room of my office the next morning, I faced my boss behind his oak desk. His expression was respectful but cautious. "Mora, I need to know if there is any truth to these allegations." He motioned toward the folder I'd slid across the desk, printed copies of posts, emails, and screenshots with my name smeared all over them. Comments like, "She stole their future," and "Rich sister playing martyr" scrolled on my screen. Digital daggers meant to be seen, believed. When he looked up at me, I said, "I've been paying for their silence for 8 years. Not anymore." He leaned forward and quietly said, "Then we stand by you." My pulse raced, not with panic but relief, a strange sort of vindication. That night, I sat alone after Asha had gone to sleep. I opened the photo album I kept tucked away in the bedroom closet. Every birthday party, every graduation, every family gathering. I noticed for the first time I was always behind the camera, always the one taking the pictures. I seldom appear in a frame. I traced the edges of a photo from 5 years ago. Me smiling at Dad's carolers, Israel standing beside him, arm around his shoulders. I remember thinking I was contributing to their happiness. Now I realize I felt invisible. I whispered to the darkness. They erased me by making me useful. A tear slid down my cheek, but I didn't reach to wipe it. Instead, I closed the album and opened my laptop. It was time to stop being compliant. When the first email popped in, I didn't hesitate. Files, contracts, bank transfers, liability forms, years of my name used as collateral. My lawyer's response was crisp. This isn't defamation, this is fraud, and now it's provable. The numbers and documents I had once ignored became weapons. I exhaled slowly and let the tension settle into a new kind of focus, strategic, determined. Later that night, I peeked into Asha's room. The light was soft and warm. On her small art desk, she carved the wooden box again, but this time she wasn't following the same lines. Her hands guided the knife with purpose. She looked up and said quietly, "Mom, it's almost done." I leaned against the doorframe and asked, "The new box?" She nodded. "No, something stronger." I paused, watching the reflection of the carving blade flash in the lamps. Glow. It struck me, my daughter doesn't wait for people to fix things anymore. She builds something better. I closed the door softly, head high, but heart full. They thought they were still in the driver's seat, but I had already taken the wheel. The evening air hung heavy, still clinging to the last warmth of sunlight, when I glanced out the living room window and froze. There, standing side by side on the lawn I mowed every Sunday, were my parents, each gripping a hand-painted sign that read, in thick black letters, "Ungrateful daughter." My first instinct wasn't anger. It was disbelief, that quiet, bottomless kind that hollows you out before you can even react. Asha peeked from behind the curtain, her small voice cracking. "Why are Grandma and Grandpa doing that?" I didn't want to lie, not anymore. "Because I stopped paying for their comfort," I said, soft but firm. I placed a hand on her shoulder and gently guided her away from the window. "And they're trying to make me feel guilty for it." Outside, my father was shouting something I couldn't make out, not because I couldn't hear it, but because I didn't want to let the words stain our walls. We didn't eat dinner that night. I sat by the front door, listening to the rhythmic pacing of their feet on my grass until they finally left. But it didn't end there. By morning, a neighbor's video had gone viral. My mother waving her sign like a flag of martyrdom, my father calling me cold, selfish, the reason families fall apart. The caption read, "Daughter evicts elderly parents after cutting them off." My inbox filled before noon. Some emails were one-liners. "You monster." Others were essays from strangers lecturing me about family values. One even quoted scripture. I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I straightened my blazer, grabbed my work bag, and drove to the office. When I pulled into the parking lot, I saw them again, standing just beyond the company gate, holding those same signs, as if repetition made their lies more convincing. Security caught me at the door. "Ms. Holton, your parents are here. Again." "I saw," I said. My voice didn't tremble this time, not even a little. Inside, HR waited for me with tight smiles and concerned eyes. "Maura," the director said, "if you need time off, we can work something out." "No," I replied, folding my hands calmly in my lap. "I don't need time. I need to show them what boundaries look like." That evening, I sat across from my lawyer, the same calm man who'd been there since the bank called. I handed him the video, the timestamps, the addresses. "I want them served," I said, "officially." He raised an eyebrow. "Ready to escalate?" "They already did," I said. The cease and desist went out that night, citing trespassing laws, harassment, public defamation. My parents didn't respond, but the next morning they returned to the gate, holding new signs now laminated, as if preparing for rain. They didn't get far. Security approached them gently but firmly, and this time escorted them off the premises. I watched from my office window. I didn't cry. There was something final about that moment, as if the illusion had cracked just enough for truth to flood in. They weren't fighting for love, they were fighting for control. I whispered to myself, "Love without respect is not love. It's leverage." That night, after Asha had gone to bed, I went into the kitchen and opened the drawer I hadn't touched in months. Inside, beneath the rubber bands and old receipts, was the cracked coffee mug. The one from weeks ago, still holding its shape, but barely. I took out the glue. Slowly, deliberately, I traced each line, sealing each fracture. I didn't rush. I let my hands move with intention. "Everything they broke," I whispered, pressing two jagged edges together. "I can rebuild stronger." When it dried, I placed it next to the wooden box on the shelf above my desk. Two scars, side by side, reminders not of damage but of survival. The house was quiet. For now. The morning after the protest ended, I woke to the sound of glass exploding. Not a cup, not a dish, a window. I ran to the living room and found Asha screaming near the corner. A brick lay inches from her paintbrushes, shattered glass scattered across her sketchbook. Her latest drawing, half-colored, now torn down the middle. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her away from the wreckage, my heart pounding so hard it blurred the edges of my vision. The police arrived within 15 minutes. The officer, young, polite, but clearly rattled, crouched near the brick, careful not to disturb the evidence. "This wasn't random," he said quietly, almost apologetically. "I know," I answered. After Asha was safe at a friend's house, I reviewed the security camera footage. My fingers trembled as I rewound the feed. At 3:47 a.m., a familiar car rolled slowly down the block. Israel's. He didn't get out, just stopped for 2 seconds, the window cracked, then sped off before the brick even hit the floor. I didn't pause. I didn't call. I forwarded the clip to my lawyer and the officer from the vandalism report. The message in the email was brief. No more warnings. By Friday, Israel's name was trending on local news sites. The same reporters who once praised his handmade pottery were now dissecting his financial records, fraud, tax evasion, a chain of LLCs tied to shell bank accounts, and screenshots from my earlier lawsuit corroborating it all. "Houston Potter accused of financial misconduct," the headline read. Beneath it, a grainy still from his mugshot. I sat on the couch that night, watching the segment in silence. A single tear rolled down my cheek, not because I missed him, not because I wanted revenge. It was closure, deep and steady. I could finally exhale. The silence didn't last long. A few days later, an envelope was hand-delivered to my door. No stamp, just my name in shaky handwriting. A mutual friend, one of the few left, had brought it from my parents. Inside was a letter. "We didn't know how bad it was. We just wanted to protect him. Please forgive us." No signature, just those 3 lines, each one stinging in a different way. I didn't cry. I folded the letter neatly, walked into my bedroom, and slid it into the box where I'd kept every receipt, every lie, every printed post. Not to destroy it, but to remember. "They didn't want to protect him," I whispered. "They wanted to protect the illusion." I closed the lid slowly. Some things don't belong in the fire. They belong on shelves, not to haunt you, but to remind you why you don't go back. Later that week, Asha and I were packing, not because we were running, but because we were ready for something new. The lease on the old place was ending, and so was everything it stood for. I carried a small box to the car. Inside were just 2 items, the repaired wooden box she'd made, and my old mug, glued and patched, but whole. Asha buckled herself into the passenger seat, glanced at the box, and asked, "Why do we keep the broken stuff, Mom?" I looked at her, her eyes steady, stronger than I remembered. "Because they remind us what we survived," I said. She nodded once, just once. And that was enough. As we pulled out of the driveway, I didn't look back. Not at the street, not at the shattered window we hadn't fixed, not at the past. By sunset, the past was behind us, but healing had only just begun. 6 months later, I woke to light pouring through tall windows that didn't rattle in the wind, didn't hold the echo of slamming doors or voices raised in judgment. This home in Austin wasn't big, but it was ours, clean, quiet, and filled with the kind of silence that lets you breathe. The morning was warm. Asha was still asleep upstairs, curled in a blanket she'd stitched herself, tiny initials embroidered in one corner. I sipped my coffee at the window, watching a pair of ducks glide across the lake behind the house. Peace used to feel like a luxury I couldn't afford. Now it felt like breath, ordinary, necessary. At noon, I walked down to the studio. I named it Second Grain, a nod to the way wood, when sanded and polished after damage, shows a new pattern even stronger than before. I ran art workshops for single mothers, not just to paint or carve, but to reclaim space, to speak out loud what they'd been told to bury. Asha helped me set up every class. She'd grown taller, quieter in some ways, but surer in others. Just last month, she'd won a local contest with a carving titled, "The Strongest Wood Still Has Scars." When she showed it to me, I didn't speak. I just held her hand, because words felt too small for the pride I carried. One afternoon, after a class had wrapped and the tables were being cleaned, an older man stood near the doorway. I recognized him instantly. A neighbor from Houston, someone who'd once passed my parents with a wave and me with averted eyes. He nodded. "You're braver than most people I've known," he said. I didn't flinch. "I just learned that silence has a price." He smiled, small and sad, then turned and left. The days passed gently. I didn't check court updates. Israel's case was ongoing, the process slow and technical, but I didn't need to see it unfold. I already knew how it ended, not in a courtroom, but in that brick, that letter, that broken line in the sand I refused to erase again. Then, one evening, a message appeared in my inbox. Subject: "Hope you're well, body. We saw the news about your studio. We're glad you're doing well." Mom. That was it. I didn't respond. I printed it, folded it neatly, and added it to the box in my closet, the same one that held every echo of their choices. I didn't keep it out of anger. I kept it because some memories don't need to be erased, just stored, like brittle paper that teaches more when read once and left alone. "Some doors stay closed," I whispered, sealing the box. Not out of hate, but out of peace. On the final weekend of summer, I rearranged the display shelf at the front of the studio. The wooden box Asha fixed sat beside the old mug I'd once glued together, each item bearing quiet proof of survival. I placed a small card beneath them, for my daughter, who taught me how to build again. As I stepped back to admire it, Asha wrapped her arms around my waist. "You kept them." I looked down at her. "Of course. They're proof we survived." She smiled, eyes shining with something softer than pride, something like understanding. That night, we closed up the studio together. She turned off the lights while I locked the door. Outside, the street was bathed in golden dusk. I could hear her laugh as she ran ahead toward the car. I stood there for a moment, keys in hand, letting the air settle around me. I used to think family meant blood. Now I know it means truth. You don't lose people when you draw boundaries. You lose the versions of them that only survived by crossing yours. And sometimes that's the gift. I walked toward the car, toward Asha, toward the life we rebuilt, not in spite of what broke, but because of it. By sunset, they'd lost everything. But I finally found myself.